Good morning and welcome speakers and audience to the 7th webinar in the All Energy Decarbonised Virtual Summit. And it's the 24th we've held since May. Today, the emphasis is on Decarbonise, which is co-located with All Energy in real life and concentrates on the pillars of low carbon heat, energy efficiency and low carbon transport. There are around 220 gathered in our virtual audience for the Energy Efficient Scotland Solutions and the Future webinar. It was a delight to welcome Paul Wheelhouse, Minister for Energy, Connectivity and the Islands, to our earlier session this morning with a keynote address packed full of detail, including an announcement which will be covered later in this session, and news and consultations to be responded to. If you missed it, do hunt it out on our website and watch on demand. And the discussion at the end of the session was riveting. I'm Judith Patton, Project Director of our duo of shows and the co-creator of All Energy way back at the start of the century. It's time for some housekeeping points. Whilst I talk very briefly, my slide will help you get the best and greatest benefit possible during your time with us today and afterwards. It is important that if you would like to ask questions or rate this webinar, you shrink your screen from full screen to be able to see where to do those things. And if you opt for attachments, you can see all 8 of the webinars being held during this virtual summit. Tuesdays and yesterdays are already available for on-demand viewing, as this one will be later on. The presentations will take a little longer, but will be online very soon. Suzanne Lemierre, Head of Heat Policy at the Scottish Government, is chairing this morning's session. She's a mine of information, having worked for the government across energy efficiency and heat policy since 2011. And before that was with the Energy Saving Trust, and earlier in the century worked for the Greater London Authority, covering the period of 2 mayors in various roles covering energy efficiency policy. I'm delighted that LCITP successes and lessons learned will be covered. We'd planned a whole 90 minutes on it in the live not held in May event. So too will be the work of 3 deliverers: Warm Works, who deliver Warmer Homes Scotland, the Energy Saving Trust and Zero Waste Scotland. We welcome you all. Without more ado, I'd like to urge all of you here today and your families to stay safe in these strange and worrying times. And now pass over to Susie and wish you all an enjoyable and fruitful 90 minutes.
Hello everyone. Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank you very much, Judith, and I'd like to welcome you all to this session, which will look at some of the lessons learned and with a look to the future for some of our programmes that work with and in the Energy Efficient Scotland umbrella. The Energy Efficient Scotland programme is an overarching programme with objectives across 2 key policy areas. The first, removing poor energy efficiency as a driver for fuel poverty, and the second objective around reducing greenhouse gas emissions through more energy efficient buildings and decarbonising our heat supply. The Energy Efficient Scotland route map in 2018 highlighted that this is a 20-year programme. Earlier in the session this morning, the Minister highlighted that meeting our emissions targets will mean that almost all of our 2.6 million or so buildings in use today will need to be retrofitted, and that our 2030 emissions target in particular is stretching. He highlighted that the ambition to set the rate of renewable heat installations fitted in new and existing buildings at least double every year, and from a current baseline of around 2,000 installations per year to around 60,000 fitted yearly by the middle of the decade. Energy efficiency improvements will need to underpin many of these installations, and we are beginning to further scale up and grow our investment. The Minister noted that last week, Scottish Government opened a new 4 million SME loan cashback scheme. Eligible businesses can access grant support of up to £20,000 to help towards installing energy efficiency and renewable heat measures. He also announced an expanded cashback and interest-free loan offer for Scottish households, which will open for applications early next month. It will offer up to 75% cashback on loans for renewable heat and up to 40% for energy efficiency. He also covered a number of our programmes and policies already supporting the Energy Efficient Scotland programme objectives. These include the Energy Efficiency Standard for social housing, which the representative from Highland Council spoke about, the upcoming consultation on the 2024 new build standards, the development of a voluntary zero carbon standard for new public sector buildings, which Kate Duplay from the NHS also touched on in their discussions, and the non-domestic energy efficiency framework, which Andrew from Mott MacDonald talked about in more detail. The Minister also covered impartial advice services, local heat and energy efficiency strategies, and the development of a heat pump sector deal. He highlighted that we will be publishing a heat and building strategy, which will set out further actions, including the approach we will be taking to regulation, for example, of the private rented sector. Now, in this session, this morning and afternoon, we've got 4 speakers who will be talking to you briefly, and they are a mine of information on their programme, so I'm sure there's much more that they could divulge than they've got in the time available. So please feel free to ask as many questions as you can and draw out that expertise from them. We have Carol Stewart from the Scottish Government, who will talk about some of the successes from the Low Carbon Infrastructure Transition Programme and the lessons learned and future focus. We have Ross Armstrong from Warm Works, who will talk about some of the lessons from the Warmer Home Scotland and with a forward look there. Mark MacArthur from the Energy Saving Trust, who will talk about and advice and support programmes in the domestic sector, including area-based schemes and loans. And David Gunn from Zero Waste Scotland, who will talk about the Energy Efficiency Business Support Scheme, the SME loans, and discuss some of the impacts these activities have had to date. So with the aim of making sure that the speakers have as much time to talk as possible, I would like to introduce Carol Stewart from the Scottish Government, who will be talking about some of the successes from the Low Carbon Infrastructure Transition Programme and lessons learned.
Hi, morning everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Susie. I'm Carol Stewart. I'm the team leader for low carbon infrastructure within the Energy and Climate Change Directorate at Scottish Government. I've worked on the LCITP programme since the beginning of it about 5 years ago in 2015. In my presentation this morning, I'm just going to give a bit of background to the programme, what the aims and objectives are. Then I'll cover and give a bit of information on some of our successful projects that we've worked with. I'll then briefly cover some of our lessons learned, although there are very many of these important learnings and knowledge that we've gained through the programme. I'll then cover a little bit about future focus, and then I'll just give some information on our current opportunities and funding rounds that are open at the moment. Can I have my next slide, Jamie, please? So the LCITP is a partnership capital investment programme. It's led by the Scottish Government, and we work in partnership with our enterprise agencies, that's Scottish Enterprise and Highlands Enterprise. And we also have support and input from Scottish Futures Trust and the Resource Efficient Scotland programme, which is part of Zero Waste Scotland. The programme has been running since 2015. And we've been working in partnership with a lot of kind of innovative kind of new delivery mechanisms and low carbon projects across Scotland. Could I have the next slide, please, Jamie? So the main objectives and aims of LCITP were to help accelerate the delivery of low carbon energy opportunities across Scotland and to help support the ambitions that are set out in Scotland's climate change plan. The programme itself has sort of 2 main strands of capital project support. The first one of these is essentially for project development support to help projects reach capital readiness and be prepared for investment and delivery. So the LCITP can provide support for things like feasibility studies, business case development, procurement support, technical expertise and input, and investment options. The programme also has a large capital budget over the past 5 years or so, which we have used to invest in a programme of demonstrator projects across Scotland. At the moment we've got sort of 28 projects. Some of them are operational and are working well, and some of them are still in the earlier stages and are going through procurement. Some of them are under construction, but it's kind of a wide and varied portfolio of projects that we've worked with, including things like heat networks, energy storage, energy efficiency, covering a broad spectrum of low carbon infrastructure projects. Can I have my next slide, please, Jamie? So the LCITP programme has supported, I think, 5 or 6 large-scale local authority-led heat networks across Scotland. In the photographs on my slide, this is the Queen's Quay water source heat pump project in Clydebank. It's taking heat from the River Clyde and converting it into a usable form that's heating the new Queen's Quay development. We've also supported innovative heat networks in Stirling, Dundee, and a few of the other local authority areas across Scotland. So it really made a bit of a difference in the increase in deployment and heat networks across Scotland. The next slide, please. We also provide support to sort of private and commercial businesses across Scotland. On my slide here, you'll see the Mackie's ice cream plant in Aberdeenshire. We've been working with Mackie's over the past 2 years or so on a low carbon refrigeration project, which is quite kind of an innovative cooling solution that will bring good climate and business efficiency measures into their business and their ice cream operations there. The other picture there is the Aviva Perth headquarters, and you can see a large installation of solar carports that have been installed in Aviva, which is helping to make the site more self-sustainable and increase its green credentials. Have the next slide, please, Jamie. We've also done a lot of work on local and innovative energy systems across Scotland. We've got a number of good examples and demonstrator projects that we're using as exemplars. We worked with Nova Innovation and Tesla on a battery storage project linked to the Shetland tidal array, which brought about a lot of improvements there. The bottom picture is the Equilibrium Leisure Centre in Campbelltown. We have helped to install a heat recovery process in the building that's helping improve efficiency and low carbon. The picture on the right is the beautiful Fair Isle, which is probably one of LCITP's most well-known projects. And working with the community there, we were able to achieve bringing the islanders 24-hour power for the first time in its history by installing an innovative low-carbon energy system and moving them away from outdated diesel generators, which has been a big achievement for the programme. Have the next slide, please, Jamie. So as I mentioned, the biggest part of our budget has been on capital demonstration projects, and all of the projects have dissemination strategies. They've all completed lessons learned outcomes, and we continue to work with them over the next sort of 4 or 5 years or so to monitor their progress and how they get on an operational level. The lessons that we've learned from working with these projects over the past few years have been very informative, and have covered a wide range of issues and pulling together these quite complicated partnership approaches to projects, including things like project management, procurement, reliance on modelling, market testing, improvements to contracts and consumer protection as well. All of the projects that we've worked with are very happy to share their learnings with others in the industry and others that are looking to do something similar themselves. And they're happy to share their learning with you. LCITP is coming to an end quite soon. It was originally a 6-year ERDF programme, and 2021 will be essentially our final year of it. So at the moment we're doing a little bit of thinking and scoping around what the next steps would be. And I think key to that is moving on from our suite of demonstrator projects, which have taken us a long way and have kind of moved Scotland further on in terms of heat network and energy systems. But in order to meet the ambitions that are in our climate change targets and our energy strategy, we need to think about how we can support wider rollout and wider deployment of these technologies, and also think about innovative delivery mechanisms, including partnership working and business models and things like that as well. We will be putting out a consultation in the form of a call for evidence for the replacement to LCITP. That's due to come out in December this year. We will be seeking sort of feedback and stakeholder engagement on areas that would be good to focus on, areas that could do with some support to help build up a pipeline of opportunity for wider low carbon deployment of these types of projects across Scotland. I should also cover the current opportunities that are open through the LCITP project at the moment. We currently have 2 open funding rounds that we're inviting applications for at the moment. We have a 50 million capital call for a further series of innovative demonstrators and rollout projects. We also have a 20 million social housing net zero heat fund as well. There's further information and details available on the LCITP website for these, and please do get in touch with the team or have a look on the website if you would like more information or to receive an application pack. Next slide please, Jamie. That's the contact details of the LCITP team at Scottish Government and our web link address, and we're happy to answer any questions on the programme or indeed the future programme and the funding opportunities that we've got open at the moment. Thank you.
Carol, thank you so much for that whistle-stop tour of what is quite an extensive programme.
Yes.
And I'm sure people will have some questions which we'll take after everyone's spoken. I'd like to introduce now Ross Armstrong, who is the Managing Director of Warmworks Scotland. He manages the Scottish Government's National Fuel Poverty Scheme, Warmer Homes Scotland. Ross joined Warmworks as its first employee in 2015, having spent more than 15 years leading the delivery of schemes, projects and programmes in the public and private sector across the UK, all designed to tackle fuel poverty and promote affordable warmth. Ross, take it away.
Great. Thanks very much, Susie. So I will hopefully be able to go through some slides just to take you through the points that I want to make. So I'm going to try and put those on screen now. So what I'm going to try and do, as Susie said, is just introduce a little bit about Warmworks and Warmer Homes Scotland, about what the scheme is, what the scheme provides, what the scheme looks like, and how it fits in within the context of Energy Efficient Scotland and the wider sort of policy drivers there. I'll talk a bit about the successes and the challenges that have been faced in delivery so far, and then use those to reflect a little bit on what future-facing delivery looks like as we move towards decarbonised solutions being much more front and centre within the fuel poverty, energy efficiency, retrofit agenda. And then just as I sum up, I'll sort of try and reflect on some of the barriers and some of the challenges that we face and how they'll hopefully be resolved within that future-facing delivery context. So, a whistle-stop introduction to Warmworks and Warmer Homes Scotland. Some of you might be familiar with Warmworks, and some of you might be familiar with Warmer Homes Scotland, so I won't take too long on this. Warmworks is a joint venture. It was set up in 2015 to manage the Warmer Homes Scotland programme, which is a national scheme primarily designed to tackle fuel poverty by increasing the energy efficiency of the housing stock. Qualifying for Warmer Homes Scotland rests on 2 main points. One is about the circumstances of the applicant, so the person applying has to be in receipt of certain qualifying benefits that would indicate they are on a low income or have a disability. And then the second element of eligibility rests on the energy efficiency of the property. So if the house is energy inefficient to begin with, that would be the second qualifying criteria. So it's trying to tackle the key pillars of fuel poverty by identifying low income, disability and energy inefficient properties. Over 20,000 households have received support. We recently marked our 20,000th installation last month, and the average bill saving that applicants get is about £300 per year. Works delivered by 22 locally based, registered and accredited installers. The key for Warm Homes Scotland is, as you can see from the map, every one of those little grey dots represents a completed application. So you can see that it is genuinely a national scheme providing a national service. For the people that come to the programme, it's on a reactive first come first served basis, but it has to feel local. So national in scale, local in the experience that we provide. The budget for the current year is more than £30 million, and we don't just spend money on boilers, heating systems and insulation. We also provide wider community impacts and monitor those as a big part of what we do. So for example, 135 apprenticeships have been created in the 5 years that the scheme has been operating. So there's a wide range of things that we report on, as well as the retrofit energy efficiency improvements that we make. So as I say, that's a whistle-stop tour as to what we do. And if there are questions or clarification about do you do this or do you do that, or does the scheme provide this, we can of course pick those up in the questions later on. And the development of the scheme, so 5 years ago, 5 years is a long time in politics, 5 years is a long time in society. If we think about what's happened in the last 9 months alone, the scheme hasn't stood still. The scheme has constantly developed and evolved. And when the scheme started 5 years ago, more carbon heavy solutions such as oil and LPG were a big part of delivery, because a national scheme is across Scotland. We've got a lot of off-gas rural communities to serve and help because they're cold and their homes are energy inefficient. So oil and LPG was a big part of the mix 5 years ago when we took the contract on. Just to reflect, we in 2015, well after 2015, 2 years on, we installed 36 heat pumps, renewable heating solutions in 2016-17, and we're on track this year to install more than 300. So in just over 3 years, you can see the emergence of heat pumps, the emergence of low carbon heating has driven changes in the mix of retrofit measures that Warmer Homes Scotland has provided. So almost tenfold growth of renewable heating in just over 3 years. And I would expect that to continue to grow at a similar pace over the next 3 years. We've also seen an almost linear decline in the amount of those carbon intensive solutions in off-gas areas that I talked about earlier. So there were 774 oil or LPG systems installed in that same year, 3 years ago, and we've installed only 95 so far this year. Although we are only halfway through the year, you can still see that on a comparative basis, the rate is coming down. And that's just an example of how the scheme's evolved and recognise that for off-gas communities, low carbon solutions can work in the right context, and we can drive increases in their scale. Challenges and barriers to I guess taking this process of decarbonising heat and providing low carbon heating solutions to fuel poor homes going forward. And the first is the housing stock. We're all aware that the housing stock levels of turnover is a challenge. There's that oft repeated statistic that we already have more than 80% of the housing stock now that we will have in 2050. So low turnover of housing stock is a challenge. There are still plenty of properties out there that could be too old, genuinely unsuitable and poorly insulated. And the worst thing we can do is try and put a heat pump into one of those homes where the build type or the insulation or the fabric of the building is not up to it. Rushing to provide low carbon solutions for the sake of it in those homes will do more harm than good. It will cost customers in fuel poverty even more to heat their home with a low carbon technology if the building fabric is not properly suited to having that technology installed. So I guess the reflection there is heat pumps and low carbon solutions are growing within what the scheme does exponentially, but we're still very cautious about making sure that we select the right property types, the right customer who can take the technology and get benefit from it. Heat pumps are great, but there are no silver bullets. There isn't a panacea here. It's a case-by-case, house-by-house basis. Householders are another challenge and another barrier. I'll sum it up in a sentence and say people never quite do what you expect them to do, and people don't always act in their own best interests. So in terms of future policy, we have to bear that in mind. People in fuel poverty often have chaotic lifestyles, and we have to recognise that there's no such thing as a standard solution that we can just apply to householders. Lifestyles and circumstances are different, and one size doesn't fit all. The supply chain is ready to deliver. I get asked a lot about, is the supply chain ready to deliver low carbon heating? The reality is that it's there right now, but companies will only work through that transition if they're given the right investment context. On Warmer Home Scotland, we have 22 SMEs that work with us as installers and manufacturers, and we gave them a 7-year commitment within a 7-year contract that we got from the Scottish Government. We passed that 7-year commitment on to them, and they have invested, they have scaled up, and they have cross-trained, but giving them the certainty of that investment context is absolutely key. And the last challenge is regulatory factors. So, there are parts of the system, whether that's with DNOs transition into DSOs, load upgrades need to be made, meter changes need to be made, smart meters need to be tackled, grid flexibility needs to increase, battery storage, building warrants, planning permission. I promise I could do about 25 minutes on the various regulatory barriers that we face. None of them by themselves are insurmountable, but there are clear policy changes that need to be thought about in terms of planning, in terms of network operators and grid flexibility as we sort of increase the pace of moving to low carbon heating solutions for fuel poor homes. So last slide for me, just to reflect on a few points that I've raised and hopefully frame some ideas in people's minds for discussion and questions later on. There's a significant amount of positive lessons that can be taken away from what we've achieved so far. More than 20,000 homes made more energy efficient under the scheme. We've seen the transition already starting to occur to providing low carbon solutions for those customers. And we've done it with industry leading quality standards of jobs and apprenticeships created. So whatever we build in the future, we should build on the platform that's already been established from a delivery perspective. It's important not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We really need to understand what works and build on that as we shape the delivery platform of the future. And the last point there, just reflecting on some of the misconceptions and assumptions that might be made. Think about what I said in the last slide in terms of what householders are like, what properties are like, and what the regulatory framework is like. There are barriers and challenges to be negotiated, and it's important that we formulate them correctly in our minds as we set the future policy direction. And that is me, I think. So I will hand back. Obviously there's a slide there for questions, but I'm sure we'll catch up with some questions later on. So thanks, Susie. Back to you, I guess.
Thanks, Ross. And there's some really interesting points there about skills, and there's skills that the programme supports, and the requirement for industry to have that certainty of investment. So thank you for that. I'd now like to introduce Mark MacArthur. Mark has been working with the Energy Savings Trust since 2007 in a role promoting the uptake of energy company energy efficiency obligation funding in Scotland and supporting local authorities, ISLs, in accessing energy efficiency funding. He has previously worked for East Lothian Council and with Changeworks, and also worked with on energy efficiency with businesses in Dundee and Glasgow. Mark, would you like to talk a little bit now about domestic programs and the programs programs such as the area-based schemes? Thank you, Mark.
Can you see my presentation? Right. My presentation is going to be about Energy Efficient Scotland funding schemes that are supported by Home Energy Scotland. So I'm going to give a quick run through these and also discuss some of the changes to the schemes that's happened over the last year. For those of you who don't know, Home Energy Scotland is a network of energy efficiency advice centres. It's managed by the Energy Saving Trust on behalf of the Scottish Government, provides impartial carbon saving advice to householders, landlords, local authorities, community groups and businesses. So Energy Efficient Scotland, this is a 20-year programme aimed at making Scotland's existing buildings near carbon, net zero carbon by 2050. Programmes that are currently supported by Home Energy Scotland and are part of Energy Efficient Scotland include Warm Home Scotland, which Ross has covered, the East Area Based Scheme, which we tend to refer to as ABS, the loan schemes that support Warm Home Scotland and the ABS scheme, the Home Energy Scotland loan scheme, a private rented landlords scheme, and the Energy Efficient Scotland equity loan pilot. So Ross has really covered Warm Home Scotland, but just to cover that again, it provides energy efficiency measures and heating measures to households that meet certain fuel poverty risk criteria. And households access the scheme through Home Energy Scotland, and those who are likely to be eligible are passed to Warm Works, who confirm eligibility and organise installation of appropriate measures. Looking at the area-based scheme, this has been in place since 2013 and provides energy efficiency measures to private sector households in low-income areas. The scheme is managed by local authorities, and they're given a sort of funding allocation based on size of local authority, level of needs and performance, etc. And the schemes are usually delivered in focused local authority areas, but sometimes they may be delivered more widely, maybe focusing on one or two types of measure. Home Energy Scotland advises area-based schemes clients, and over the past 13 years there's been 100,000 households have received measures, and that's mostly been wall and roof insulation. As with Warm Home Scotland, the funding integrates with energy company obligation funding where possible, and that's helped expand the sort of size of the scheme with extra funding coming in, and also tries to promote additional eco-funded measures where possible as well. The funding levels of householders get are dependent on the house type, rurality, and also the profile of the householder, and I'll say a bit about that later. Up to 15% of the local authority allocation can go to fund enabling work, so that helps with things like procurement, management of the delivery of the programmes, etc., and some additional measures to help works get carried out. There have been various changes to the area-based scheme over the past year. That's really sort of to help support the target that no fuel poor household live in a property that's below EPCC by 2030. So they're trying to see how that scheme can be used to try and expand the number of measures and progress towards that EPC target. So there's proposals for like 3-year funding allocations to local authorities. I think that's still being organised, but it's been kind of disrupted by the current emergency. But I think that would give greater continuity and certainty to programmes. There's also removal and a restriction on accessing area-based scheme for households that have recently received Warm Home Scotland support. So we did find that some people maybe had some insulation measures and heating systems, but maybe still required external wall insulation. So that restriction has been removed. And again, once somebody's received area-based scheme funding, if they've got outstanding measures required, they could theoretically go to Warm Home Scotland. There's higher base funding levels that have been allocated to the scheme, so that's between 7,000 and 8,000 normally, but up to £10,000 in rural areas. And there's also a feature which local authorities can put in place, which is providing higher funding for households that are in extreme fuel poverty, and that's 12,000 normally, but 14,000 in remote rural areas. And it covers householders that would meet the Warm Home Scotland eligibility criteria around in receipt of cold weather payments or meet the Scottish Government fuel poverty definition. And that funding, extra funding, will tend to cover perhaps things like the more expensive of the external wall insulation systems, but possibly additional measures required to move the householder closer to the EPCC target. Looking at the Scottish Government energy efficiency loan schemes, these have gone through a bit of reorganisation in 2020-21. Landlord eligibility for the Scottish Government's Resource Efficient Scotland SME loan scheme and the HES loan scheme has been removed, and that's now been consolidated into a new private rented sector landlord loan scheme for private landlords aimed at both small-scale landlords and commercial landlords. And there's also an equity loan pilot for energy efficiency measures, which is ongoing. So I'll say a bit more about these in detail. So there are loan schemes that support the Warm Home Scotland and ABS schemes. Sometimes householders have a contribution to pay towards measures, and for the Warm Home Scotland loan, that could be interest-free loans of up to £10,000 to cover any cost contributions for owners that are helped by the scheme, and that's available to both private sector landlords of the beneficiaries and also owner-occupiers. For the ABS loan scheme, there's an interest-free loan of up to £10,000. That's split between up to £5,000 for energy efficiency measures or £5,000 for repairs. That's for owner-occupiers or private sector landlords of clients of that scheme. And there's a 1.5% admin charge up to a maximum of £150 applies to that scheme. The Home Energy Scotland loan scheme, that's probably one of the main loan schemes targeting owner-occupiers. Currently, it's providing up to £15,000 for energy efficiency and heating measures, with about 25% cash back on the energy efficiency measures of up to £3,750. There's up to £500 available with 25% cash back for secondary improvements related to the energy efficiency measures, and up to £17,500 for installing up to 2 renewable or energy storage systems. Now, the Minister this morning announced that there's going to be some changes to that scheme, so it will soon provide 40% cash back up to certain caps for various energy efficiency measures, £17,500 interest-free loan for up to 2 renewable systems plus £6,000 for an energy storage system, 75% cash back up to £7,500 for renewable heat measures, and there's a 1.5% admin charge up to £150 applies to that. So the changes haven't come in just yet, but I think householders are being advised of that and are maybe putting their names down for it in the future. The private sector landlord loan, which has been set up over the last few months, that provides loans for energy efficiency and renewable measures for landlords. So if a landlord has 5 properties or fewer in a portfolio, they can borrow up to £100,000 interest-free, but if they've got 6 or more, then they can borrow up to £250,000 with a 3.5% interest rate. An admin fee for that is slightly higher, £250 maximum, but still 1.5%. Just to conclude with the equity loan pilot, this has been going for a few years now, and it's been piloted in 8 local authority areas. It's available to homeowners or private sector landlords that have got no more than 2 rental properties where the household is in council tax band A to C. The loan provides up to £40,000, but is limited to 50% of the market value of the property, and that has to go up to at least 55% has to go for energy efficiency works, but up to £45,000, 45% could go for repairs that are necessary for the energy efficiency works to proceed. The householder must be left with 30% free equity after the loan and remaining mortgage, and the equity loan is secured in the property. There's no actual repayments made by the householder, so the actual money would be recovered by the Scottish Government on transfer or sale of the property, so that would be based on the equity percentage that's been taken by the Scottish Government and what the market value of the sale is. I think there's also various restrictions that if the house went up massively in price, then it wouldn't necessarily be the full percentage that would be taken. The scheme is managed by the Energy Saving Trust on behalf of the Scottish Government, and DST works with various partners who provide hand-holding and advice to applicants. So that typically has been care and repair projects and housing associations who are partners of the Energy Saving Trust in delivering the scheme. All applicants have to go through advice and receive full free partial advice on the best options available to them through Home Energy Scotland. And Scottish Government solicitors prepare legal papers and send these out to applicants so that their solicitors can look at it and carry out any sort of legal discussion with the householder and conclude agreements. And I think that legal part has been probably one of the sort of difficult parts of that scheme, that obviously there's maybe not very much understanding of how these sort of systems work, but I think gradually as more experience is gained of the project, both the Scottish Government solicitors and the legal profession in general gets more familiar with this type of solution, and hopefully this might provide a sort of win-win type scenario where the householder gets some of their equity owned by the Scottish Government, but maybe the value of the property will go up because it's been improved. So it does provide a sort of win-win situation financially and in terms of fuel poverty. It does tend to just target those that have got equity in the property, so it will tend to be older householders or people who have owned the property for a number of years that are probably going to benefit from this scheme. So that's a quick whistle-stop tour through the schemes. You'll probably all be sort of gasping for breath after that, as am I. So I'll sort of turn you back to Susie.
Thank you, Mark. That was very comprehensive coverage of the detail on the loan schemes, and quite interesting to hear how some of the programs have adjusted to work more together. Next up is David Gunn from Zero Waste Scotland, who has been working there since 2018. He's currently responsible for the Energy Efficient Business Support Service and the Circular Energy Business Service, and the IRGP Refill Fund. Prior to joining Zero Waste Scotland, he worked for as the Climate Change Fund Manager at Keep Scotland Beautiful, and was responsible for over 1,000 grants to support community action on climate change. David, are you there and ready to give your presentation?
Yeah,
I'm so pleased. I know there was a technical problem.
My heart is back to normal, having computer failure 10 minutes ago, but we're back. Is my slide showing? I'm assuming my slide is showing. So thank you very much for the introduction and for having me along to the webinar today. I'm going to give you a summary of the Energy Efficiency Business Service and the SME loan, both of which are aimed at Scottish SMEs to help them identify and implement energy efficiency and renewable measures. Firstly, though, just a quick summary of Zero Waste Scotland. We exist to help Scotland, to lead Scotland to use products and resources responsibly. We've got a real focus that all the work we do contributes to reducing carbon dioxide and taking action on climate change. And we've got three main operational departments: resource management, looking at supporting local authorities and businesses to manage their solid waste more effectively; and circular economy work, again trying to support businesses to adopt circular economy business models; and the resource efficiency department, which is where these schemes sit, and that's all of that work is focused on climate action. Briefly, the three main objectives of the organisation is one, to increase responsible consumption of products, to support the responsible production of products and services by businesses, and to maximise the recovery of value from waste and energy. So the Energy Efficiency Business Support Service was previously known as Resource Efficient Scotland. That was launched in April 2013, and we have supported over 3,500 SMEs in Scotland with support since then. From April this year, we rebranded the service as the Energy Efficiency Business Support Service and really focused that support on energy. This service is part funded by the Scottish Government and the European Regional Development Fund, and we're offering a range of advice and support services, which I'm going to discuss over the next few slides. So as well as the carbon benefits, there are significant cost-saving benefits to SMEs around energy efficiency, and so here's some of the examples. We've helped businesses save on average 24% on their energy bills, creating lifetime project savings of £15,000 over 5 years, and the measures that we've identified have potential to save £54 million in terms of their lifetime over the lifetime of the measures installed. So the service is aiming to tackle the four key barriers: lack of time, lack of technical skills within an organisation, getting management support or buy-in for the changes, and lack of funding to implement the measures. So the lack of time, the service provides a dedicated advisor to work with you to identify the scope of the project, to make sure that support is properly designed to be as effective as possible, and to overcome that barrier of time to consider what the options are. In terms of skills, we have the service has a framework of consultants across Scotland who can bring specific technical expertise to a project to make sure that the advice that we're giving is as helpful as possible. And it's not just that there's a lack of skill in these topics in SMEs. Sometimes the organisation know what they want to do. They just need a second opinion from an expert to help them confirm what it is that they want to do. And we would provide that support through the service. We will provide every business with with a resource opportunity audit, which identifies the business case for the changes, and that can then be used to get buy-in to implement the measures. The reports cover not just the technology specifications and the energy savings, but the financial savings that would come around and makes that business case to move forward with the project. And the final and possibly the most significant barrier for an SME in implementing a measure is finance and lack of funding to do these. Often the upfront cost can be quite substantial, and the savings are spread off through a number of years afterwards. And by accessing an SME loan, SMEs can access that funding that helps them get the project up and running and moving forward, rather than having to go to private investment or bank loans, etc. And that leads me nicely into the SME loans. That was recently enhanced and relaunched. It was the 29th of October we went live with that, maybe the 28th. And essentially the SME loan has been enhanced to provide more cash back to SMEs for renewable heat projects, 75% cash back on the value of the loan up to a maximum of £10,000, 30% cash back for energy efficiency projects up to maximum £10,000. And the reason for those percentages is, we want to prioritise renewable heat projects, but like I think as Ross was saying, that there's not the benefit for those projects is only really achieved where the premises are already energy or heat efficient, and so we really want to make sure that is the case. All loans are interest free, and the offer is available up to the end of this financial year. As I say, that to access the loan, an SME must have an energy efficiency or renewable report from our service, and we are currently scaling up to deal with the increased demand that we are confident that we will see. And something that I had meant to say earlier in the presentation around just the levels of engagement with the service, even through the pandemic, we have had increasing levels of engagement on energy efficiency. And in fact, the last quarter was the busiest that we've had in the entire operation of the service since 2013, which I think demonstrates people's or SMEs' desire for action in this area, but also just the connection to energy efficiency as a product that has remained, even though the operating context for businesses is much, much more difficult just now. So very simple ways for people to get in touch to start their journey towards implementing carbon saving measures. We can either come through our website. You can come on that website. There's contacts with a free phone and an email address, and that would put you in touch directly with an energy advisor who would work with you to design the support and make sure it was as useful as possible. And that is the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to discuss anything that people want to discuss in relation to the service. Thank you.
David, thank you very much. That was fantastic, and you kept to time. We are running slightly over time, but that's because others were a bit longer. So thank you, David. And now it's time for questions. So if you haven't already, please feel free to put some questions into the system, and the other panelists will appear now, and I am just waiting to see if some questions come up on my system. In the meantime, I was going to ask, here's one of the first questions coming through. So that is, how does, this is a specific one to Warmworks, how does Warmworks Warm Home Scotland aim to get each house to a standard acceptable to 2045 carbon targets? What scale of outstanding retrofits is there, and is that from limits? Is that from limits of the scheme funds? Basically, it's a question about getting to zero emissions through the Warmworks programme. Ross, do you want to maybe take that as a first off? But I think that there's a broader question there about getting to zero emissions through our programs.
Yeah, and so at the moment, the scheme reports back on pre and post SAP ratings of properties. So we measure the initial SAP rating, which is the standard metric for how energy efficient a property is. For those not intimately familiar with the SAP rating, if you imagine the energy performance labels that you see on appliances, SAP works a little bit like that, in that it goes from A down to G, and the score that your property gets determines how energy efficient that property is, and that would fall within a SAP band. So at the moment, every property that comes through Warmer Homes Scotland, we know what the pre-work SAP rating was and what SAP band it was in, and we know what the post-work SAP band is. So we report on that at the moment. Obviously, Energy Efficient Scotland has targets about getting various properties in various sectors up to various SAP bands by 2030 and then by 2040. And at the moment, the scheme's reporting is aligned with that. So we're tracking the progression of homes up the SAP bands as we make them more energy efficient. At the moment, the scheme doesn't have any sort of targets or mandates to report on how many properties we get to zero carbon, though. I mean, the way the scheme is funded and structured at the moment, the scheme isn't really taking homes all the way to zero carbon. That would need substantially more funding and substantially more investment per property than the scheme is currently set up to do. Carol's presentation talked about some of the demonstration projects and things that are driving towards, zero carbon and the deeper retrofits. At the moment, the scheme is set up to track how far we're taking houses up the SAP bands and in making them more energy efficient through the measures that we have, but it isn't necessarily targeted or funded to take homes to zero carbon. I think 2045 is not that far away, so it's something that will have to be factored into future scheme design. But at the moment, it's an iterative process rather than a transformational one, would be my answer.
Thank you there, Les. And would anybody else like to come in on in that area at all? I'll take that as no. Okay. We've got a couple of other questions. One around surveys and reports for what the opportunities are, which is what's the difference between an energy efficiency or renewable opportunity report and an energy survey or EPC. The questioner hasn't specified whether they're talking about a particular programme there. So I think maybe that would be... I
think there's probably me, for that one. And so the main difference is that the opportunity report, the purpose of that is to identify the measures that will improve the efficiency of the building and the operation. So it's not just an audit of what level they're at, it's saying what can you do and how much would that cost, what would it save if you implemented a cavity insulation, installed a heat pump, changed your lighting. That's the key difference.
Thank you very much, David. And there's also a question here specifically about the SME loans, about could you briefly outline some of the eligibility criteria and what needs to be done to qualify for the loan?
Yeah. So the first thing is you've got to be a Scottish-based SME. Secondly, you've got to have the resource opportunity form via the service that identifies the sort of measures you're wanting to apply for funding for. And in terms of what is eligible, that is in the application form and a guidance document, but it ranges from building fabric insulation measures to lighting, to heat pumps, air source heat pumps, renewable heat measures, and yeah. So that's probably off the top of my head. That's the main ones that it covers. There is specific ones because you get into quite a bit of detail about what measures are absolutely eligible, but it's all there.
Thank you very much. Thank you, David. And there's also been a question about bio-LPG and how that's being taken into account. Obviously, bio-LPG is currently available on the UK market. I know that one supplier provides an offering to the customers where there's a 40% of the LPG that is sold is effectively bio-LPG. But would anybody like to talk about that in relation to how it's taken into account in their programs? Ross, would you like to pick up on that?
Yeah, and this is something that we're looking at on the kind of continuing evolution of Wheelhouse Scotland. I mean, one of the things that I said in my presentation earlier was I don't think we should view low carbon solutions as trying to look for silver bullets. And there's no such thing as one technology that's going to do everything for every home and every building. We've been in discussions with colleagues in the industry who they've actually sent a lot of useful material about bio-LPG and how it could fit into what the scheme provides. So it's something that's under active consideration as Warmer Home Scotland develops. I don't think that everyone. It's not all about heat pumps. There will be a range of solutions, and we need to think carefully about what each technology brings to individual merits.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ross. There's another question here about loans, both SME and domestic, and whether there's any additional insurance being built in to those loans at the moment, given the increased job insecurity and illness and vulnerability aspects during this period of COVID.
For the East loan schemes, I'm not entirely sure. That's something I probably need to come back to you on.
Yeah, and similarly for us, I mean, we did have payment holidays during the pandemic that were there. I think they're still in place if you ask. So certainly, I mean, as you said as well, EST are managing that, the administration of the grant, the loan, sorry. If there were any issues, there've been discussions going, but yeah, certainly payment holidays were part of the pandemic response.
That's lovely. Thank you, David. Carol, this is a lovely question. I don't know who asked this, but I love it. What's the LCITP project that most excited you and why? And do you want to maybe describe it a little bit?
Oh, that is a lovely question. Thank you. I think probably my favourite LCITP project is Glenrothes heat, which was taking the unused heat from the RWE biomass plant. It was originally built to provide heat to the Tullis Russell paper mill, which sadly closed down and went out of business. So the biomass plant had been in electricity only mode for a number of years, and the heat was just being wasted and not utilised properly. I was involved from the very beginning of it with RWE and Fife Council and doing the business case and getting the project off the ground. The reason it's my favourite is because I guess the team and the people that were working on it, it's probably the best demonstration I've ever seen of a private-public partnership, and the community engagement and the work that went into it was absolutely amazing. And to be able to take that quite sad economic and employment situation for Glenrothes and to bring the scheme forward and kind of solve that issue, and it gives Fife Council a base to build on to hopefully expand the scheme in the future. So that's probably why we were able to solve other problems by installing our heat network.
That's brilliant, Carol. Thank you very much. Okay, I've got a couple more questions here. To what extent are we starting to consider energy used for cooling buildings as well as heating buildings in the Scottish energy efficiency debate programmes? That's a general question. Is that something anybody in particular would like to take? Has anybody got any experience either in their programmes or projects? I'm going to leave that as an open one for anybody to come in.
I think one of the things that we will be needing to look at more proactively is ventilation. So ventilation is obviously part of the schemes that we deliver and a big part of the work that's done. But the introduction of PAS 2035 and the emerging kind of focus on ventilation within that standard will be something that you will see factored more and more into scheme design and delivery. It won't just be about boilers and standard insulation, ventilation will have to be a big part of the package. So I think keeping buildings at the right temperature will be helped by that focus on ventilation, but specifically in terms of actual physical technology for cooling buildings, it's not something that we have within our scheme at the moment.
And I can imagine that that in particular the new build standards that are being proposed in 2024, it will be important for 2024. It will be important for people to comment on those in relation to cooling in particular, and I suppose Ross, that actually cooling is probably more of an issue at the moment, at least in public. In non-domestic buildings perhaps than it is in domestic buildings, but that is something that we will need to look at going forward. Now here there's a question here on about there being a gap with available help. So Warm Home Scotland helps those in fuel poverty, but what about people who are not necessarily in fuel poverty but can't afford to take on a loan, whether or not it's interest free? So I suppose, Mark, would you like to talk a little bit about the area-based schemes? And just
the
area-based targeted.
It tends to be targeted at low-income areas. So within that, the majority of people probably will be sort of more lower income, but you might get some higher income people caught up in that as well. So, but it is kind of focused on specific types of measure and specific areas. So people out with those areas wouldn't benefit. You might possibly have a scheme where maybe they're targeting cavity insulation area-wide, but that would tend to be targeting people who are on lower incomes. The loan scheme, if they did get a loan for the measure, then there's quite a reasonable sort of credit checking for that. So that probably would be available unless they've got a poor credit history. So there might be some people that would fall out of that if they're maybe slightly higher income but have poor credit history.
But that's useful feedback. Thank you.
There was one other thing on a previous question on there's international loan extensions that apply. I'm reliably informed to the loan schemes. So because of the COVID crisis, so people can get abatances and payments.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Mark. So, and now there's a question here about whether the panel has a view on how we move from retrofit of a few hundred homes in each area-based energy efficiency scheme pilot to the thousands we need to do very rapidly to meet 2030 targets. Any thoughts from anybody on the panel on this? Ross, you've talked a little bit already about what happens under what's changing under the Warm Homes programme. Unless anybody else comes in, I suppose to some extent that's a decision for Scottish Government and Scottish ministers to some extent, but any views that you have on how existing programmes could expand or extend, that might be interesting from your point of view?
There's an elephant in the room with this question, which is about investment, and investment decisions are questions for ministers, questions for government, because I mean the question refers to area-based schemes, but obviously area-based schemes and the National Warmer Home Scotland scheme are two sides of the same coin. They go together, and between them they help thousands of homes per year and make a very big impact. But if we're talking about scaling those programs up, the area-based schemes and the national scheme, which, the question is we need to do that very rapidly to meet the 2030 targets. I'll let others make that judgment. But the first and biggest question is about investment, because the infrastructure for scheme delivery at an area-based level and at a national level is largely there. And we're moving on that journey towards lower carbon retrofits and lower carbon solutions. And the challenge is it needs, first of all, a step change in investment, because with that clarity of investment and that clarity of purpose, the industry, the supply chain, the infrastructure that's been built will be able to scale up and respond.
Thank you. Oh, is that?
I was just going to. I mean, I think I appreciate the massive investment that is required to do this. There's also a cultural thing of particularly homeowners and SMEs to look at this and say we have to respond to the climate emergency. And yes, it's maybe going to be expensive, there's costs up front, but more priority given by all of us to taking action on climate change is, we're not there yet as a nation. We say a lot of good things as individuals about how important it is, but it's challenging for us all to do all the things we could do to become more energy efficient and to reduce our carbon emissions.
And I suppose, leading on from that, I suppose that's why in the previous session there were questions about regulation relating to energy efficiency and emissions, because I suppose that's the other side of the coin. Is one is the support programs, but the other one is how to either nudge or require people to do something. There's another lovely question here, one for all of you. If you were minister for the day, what would each of you introduce? I'm not sure it's fair to ask Carol that one, because she's a Scottish Government employee, so maybe the three of the others, is that fair, Carol? Unless, feel free to answer it, Carol, if you want to, but I'm going to abstain you if you'd like me to. Would anyone, how about David, you look keen.
I think I find that quite difficult to ask because there's so much that they could do. That's my get out of jail free start to this question. If I was to put one thing out,
and so I'm going to qualify that. If you were a UK or Scottish Government minister, it wouldn't have to be Scottish. It wouldn't have to be the Scottish powers that you're using.
That makes it even bigger. I suppose I would make sure that the resources that are needed, obvious thing to say, resources that are available, and clearly at this time just now resources are scarce and probably going to get scarcer with everything that's going on in terms of pandemic reduced tax take. But we need to make sure that the support is there for businesses and individuals to do that things we're asking them to do and make it as easy as possible. I'm pretty sure many of us are aware of the ISM behaviour change model, individual, social and material. People can't make a change if they don't have the right social context or the actual way of making the change. So we can't ask them to do something that isn't practical.
Great, thank you, David. Maybe I'll offer, anybody else would like to volunteer to answer that one? Has anybody any strong thoughts on that?
I suppose I could say something. I think Paul Wheelhouse beat me to it in terms of increasing cashback amounts, for example. So I think I would just go the sort of current schemes, but on speed, basically, make them much bigger and much more generous. I think for householders, energy efficiency isn't always the most sexy of options. And also, you'd rather go on holiday or get a new kitchen than improve the energy efficiency of your property. So if we're serious about the climate change emergency, I would just maybe have a wee sort of bit of taxation and use that to fund free measures for the populace and just make sure it actually does happen.
That's lovely, Mark. Thank you. Anybody else?
Maybe I'll think a bit bigger and a bit more controversially, and I'll kind of step into you. If I'm going to be minister for a day, I might as well make an impact. If I think one of the priorities that would need to be looked at UK government level would be the structure of the energy market. Because we can do downstream lots of things about retrofit and energy efficiency and improving buildings, but people live in buildings and people pay energy bills, and the way that the energy market is currently structured may or may not, depending on your perspective, be structured very suitably to be looking at things, enablers of the future, like smart time of use tariffs, adaptation to smarter grids and more flexible grids and some of the technology that's coming on board, and B, it may or may not be structured very well for those in fuel poverty who typically don't switch supplier, don't get access to technology and tariffs, and maybe get left behind by the market. So maybe if I was the UK minister, I might throw the dice on a bit of market interventionism.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Ross. That gap was for Carol to step in if she wanted to, but I don't think I'm going to ask her to. Now we have two more questions here. One is a follow-up on on the challenge of scaling up and is really around I think the skills and capacity of the market. So how are people to be recruited to do this huge job? Anybody want to come in on that?
I mean, I can speak, but not from any sense of authority, knowledge, but my own experiences, the sort of jobs that are being required to do need to be made more attractive to people when they're making life choices and go, actually, that's a career I want to have, and there is a future in that career. I mean, I think young people just now are facing many challenges and understand making the choices as to university, trades, skills, how they make those choices is going to be really important. So yeah, be clear. If this is going to be a job for the future, then let's make it attractive to people. Yeah.
There's nobody here on the panel who specifically works on this, but there are a number of programs. There's a green, I might get the name wrong, but a green skills fund that's been developed by Scottish Government. So it is definitely on the radar of the government to look at ensuring those skills are developed. But yes, that is one of our major challenges as well. It's not just the kind of the carrots and sticks, but also to make sure that the people are around, people are available to do their work.
I think the EST works with the skills partnership, trying to expand the range of sort of training that's available. I think that's probably going to be quite important to sort of build the market up to get enough trained people through. So I think we'll work on that.
I think the point around supply chain is the supply chain is full of entrepreneurial businesses who have changed before, adapted before, scaled up before, and they'll do it again. I think the recruitment side will be fine if the framework and the context for investing is fine and established. It's with the supply chain, it's a bit like the line from Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. And I genuinely believe that if you create the right investment framework, things like recruitment and upskilling, cross-skilling, and the supply chain will find a way to do it.
Thank you very much, Thus. Okay, here's the last question I've got at the moment, which is stick or carrot? What would you do to encourage householders and businesses to move with speed? That's for anybody. So who would like to come in? Wave your hand.
I think it does have to be a bit of both. Obviously, the kind of sticks to God at the moment about house sales, for example, bringing properties up to a certain EPC value is quite a good idea. But it's kind of difficult to mandate that people do that. Not everybody has the finance to do it. So it does need to be, I think, supported through government.
Great.
So, yeah.
Carol, thank you. Thank you, Mark. Carol, go ahead.
Yeah, just to agree with what Mark said, I think it's got to be a bit of both, because at the end of the day, these low carbon energy efficiency solutions, they can be more expensive than the fossil fuel alternative. So I think it's a case of encouraging people to move forward with their low carbon solutions, but we also have to provide some kind of financial support and a framework for investment and delivery if we're to move forward and meet the targets, because there's a definite cost differential there.
Thank you very much. Okay, I don't have any more questions at the moment, although there was a question from the morning session, which I think it would be interesting to apply here as well, and that was around knowledge sharing and how how programs could currently do or could in future support knowledge sharing with potentially with a small or wider range of stakeholders. So professionals, communities, and the public. So does anybody have any thoughts about what you might be doing at the moment, or what you might do in future?
Yeah, I can talk briefly about, I had a slide I took out the presentation to keep me to time about the Green Champions Network, which the EST is also involved with. They run and we help buy it, and essentially that creates a network of businesses who have gone through improvements with energy efficiency or other green measures, and they're available for other businesses to speak to share experience. And that's something we find very useful. We ran webinars around with some of those Green Network business members, and they're some of the most useful and practical webinars I've been involved with, where you've just got one business talking to another business, and our role is just to facilitate it. People want to hear from the people directly who've been affected by the work and some of the challenges that they've overcome and the experience they've had. So I would recommend that to anyone who's interested.
That sounds really interesting. And Mark, is there something similar related to housing?
In housing, well, the ESD ran the sort of green networks for social housing, for example, and green networks for householders, so they could actually see measures being installed, that sort of thing. So I think for householders to decide what kind of measures they want, it's going to be quite difficult, and they're also looking at the proper advice to understand where they can get funding support and the optimal solutions for them. So I think anything that goes towards that, and certainly our green networks is something I would point people to, which has maybe not been working that great because of the COVID crisis, but I think there may be ways around that.
That's interesting. Thanks, Mark. And Kyle or Ross, do you want to come in at all on that subject?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. There is a huge amount of learnings come out of LCITP and the other programmes that we're involved with over the past few years. At a Scottish Government level, we do try to use these when we're developing our future schemes. We also kind of rely on the sort of public sector network and the partnership through the enterprise agencies and RES, EST to share lessons learned, and our LCITP demonstrators have a sort of specific requirement to have a kind of engagement focus and to share their learning with others so that these can be picked up as well.
That's interesting, Kyle. And I think in the past I've seen sometimes when you've done calls in the past, some of your LCITP calls in the past, people have provided experience from existing schemes. So that's also another way, I suppose, that you've done stuff, which is interesting. Ross, do you want to come in at all? Go on, Kyle. Sorry, Kyle, go.
No, it's just a really guess. That's what we do. Thanks.
Okay.
And just a little bit of anecdotal feedback, really, just in terms of what we do and knowledge sharing things already. So 10% of the houses that come through Warmer Home Scotland and get work installed, and they have detailed temperature monitoring before and after. So they volunteer and take part in effectively a 12-month pilot period of monitoring the internal and external temperature of their property. So one of the things that does, and that all that data is passed back to the Scottish Government and informs sort of future programme design. One of the things that does do, though, is it demonstrates some of the behavioural changes that you see in people's properties in terms of houses being heated much more evenly, much more controlled, and much more sort of measured in terms of when houses are heated, when you have a suite of proper energy efficiency measures installed, and the house can be heated much more, I guess, evenly. So yeah, the temperature monitoring pilot is a big part of our learning and feedback loop, because it helps to show the impact of the work that's done.
And that's quite interesting, Ross, actually, because there's been research done recently by Energy Systems Catapult looking at what would encourage people to change their heating systems, and a lot of what they found is it's not what actually encourages people isn't necessarily about the emissions, but it's about the additional comfort that they may gain. So that might be really interesting learning.
That's right. One of the things that monitoring shows is that so many people that come to the scheme for help are underheating their houses quite significantly, and the percentage of underheating versus people not necessarily having their house tropical conditions, but just heating their house evenly to a proper decent standard, and the underheating percentage, which obviously that'll have all manner of health and social impacts, drops away as a result of the scheme, certainly is reduced as a result of the scheme's intervention.
That's really interesting, thank you. I don't have any more questions coming through now. I do have one other question that I will ask if I don't see any others on the chat space, and that is around tackling SME inertia, which was one of the questions from the morning session as well. So I suppose this is probably more for David and Carol. So, I mean, I suppose the SME loan, the whole purpose of the SME support service is to help tackle that inertia. And I suppose, David, what have you, from what you've seen, what has been most effective, and what are key barriers? I find it really interesting that you've had more applications and interest in the scheme in the last few months.
Yeah. So that interest was in just getting an audit. That was before we even had the enhanced measures or the enhanced cashback scheme flagged up. So far, there's been 72 SMEs who've benefited from a loan this year, about £1.4 million spend, and that's across a big range of measures as well. I'd be here for 5 minutes listing them all off because it's such a broad list. But so I suppose what was the question?
The question is, what do you see as being the most effective at tackling SME inertia, and what more do you think might be needed, I suppose?
So what we worked really hard on this year was trying to align it to what we understood to be the needs, and so it was talking about how energy efficiency measures will increase their resilience as an organisation for future shocks. It was about talking about the cost savings that could be generated and making it as convenient and easy, so it's a local service. We do all our audits can be done via the phone. You don't have to have a face-to-face or site visit. Making sure that the SME understand that they're going to have an account manager through the process, so they're not going to be passed from pillar to post. So combination of making it convenient, making it effective, and aligning it to what the SMEs are looking for. And I think we got that just about right over the summer, and that's how we've managed to get this increased level of engagement. I mean, I think within my own organisation, there was a bit of sort of people at the start of the pandemic when lockdown was really strict and about say, well, SMEs won't be interested. And actually, the SMEs are still there. They're just not trading in the same way they were. They're often owned by their own companies, and those people were thinking about their future of their SME. And I think that's where we managed to position the service as something that could help them decide how they would be functioning in future.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and that convenience and easiness. I think having grown up in an SME, I can see how they might be key. Carol, is there anything you want to add? And if not, I've got another question for you.
All right, I think it's just for SMEs, it's just about, I think trying to manage the risk for them. It can be a kind of quite huge and intimidating step to move your utility to a kind of a different scheme, and then just to providing that support is really important. And obviously the sort of peer-to-peer learning and these networks that are set up around energy efficiency can be key to that, and just building up their confidence in the reliability of the system that they're signing up to.
That's really interesting, Carol. Thank you. And there's another question here for you, Carol, as well, which is around the Glenrothes scheme. And I'm not really sure how much you're going to be able to answer this. It's around it's about whether the demand for heat from that scheme has been significantly affected, I suppose, by the COVID process, COVID situation, and if and how, if that's been an issue, how has the situation been solved? I don't really know if that's something you can particularly go into, Carol.
The heat network itself is still running. That it runs off the Markinge biomass CHP plant, which has had quite strong security of biomass supply throughout the crisis. It does have a gas backup if needed, so there would be no concerns in that area that residents and customers would be left without heat. So it has a backup system, and it's quite resilient to the COVID crisis as well.
That's great, thanks, Carol. And I suppose the in terms of asking that question, there's as with any energy system, there is an issue of resilience, and customer demand is one of the things that means that that affects that resilience. If nobody wants what's being provided, that puts that service potentially at risk. But I suppose those are some of the things that Scottish Government colleagues are working on, and I suspect will crop up again in the passage of the Heat Networks Bill over time. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, things like continuity of supply and backup are being covered.
Yeah. So I think that's all the questions we've got at the moment. Are there any kind of final remarks on either any of the questions or anything burning you'd like to say from each of the panel members? I suppose I might go through you in turn just see if there's anything else you'd like to add. I'm going to go in the opposite order to the one you spoke. So David, is there anything you would like to add?
Nothing really to add, just to encourage anybody who's out there watching this and as an SME is to get in touch with the service or myself if you want to get your support.
Thank you, David. Mark, is there anything you would like to add, or any question you'd like to ask or anything like that?
Probably just to highlight some of the services available from Home Energy Scotland and on the EST AHES websites. So there's various the tools, for example, the Renewables Finders tool, for example. Also the work that's been done with trying to support the supply chains programme with the Scottish Government. So trying to encourage, with introduction of past 2035 is going to be quite an issue, I think, for a lot of installers. So what's the implications of that, and what kind of training's involved and how best to access it. So I think that's probably a big issue that there is support being provided for.
And if an installer was concerned or wanted to get some support, should they just contact EST directly, or is there somebody specific they should contact?
I've got a colleague, Pilar Rodriguez, has taken over that programme, so to contact her, probably a good thing to do. So they could look at, even in terms of looking at what kind of assistance should be put in place. Maybe some things aren't in place, so any suggestions of where the barriers are. So it'd be good for us to try and address that.
That's great. Thank you, Mark. Ross, is there any last comments or points from you?
No, nothing to add from me. I mean, I'm sure the slides will get put up, and if anybody, if there's any questions, if anybody kind of thinks about something and wants to get in touch, by all means, I'm happy to pick up any sort of residual or follow-up, and people should feel free to get in touch if there's anything they want to chat about, but nothing specific from me, Susie, no.
That's lovely, thank you. Carol, you have the last word. You have a minute or so. Is there anything you would like to highlight?
Just to ask for input and engagement on the consultation and call for evidence for the next iteration of LCITP. Really keen to get people on barriers, what support would be needed to build up the pipeline and increase deployment, and have a look on the website for our 2 open calls and let us know if it'd be happy to chat about potential application or any projects. Thank you.
And Carol, do you want to maybe just outline when the closing dates for those the closing dates might be, just to
the expression of
minds?
The expression of interest for the 50 million green recovery call, I think, is at the end of next week, and for the social housing call, it's mid-December. I think that the 18th of December for applications for that one.
That's wonderful. Carol, thank you very much, and thank you to all of our speakers. It's been, I found it really interesting, it's good to hear some of the details that I didn't know. I hope the audience has found this useful. It is a little bit like having a little chat between the 5 of us, and then suddenly you remember that people are listening in on what we're saying. So thank you all, and I hope you have a healthy couple of months ahead, and thank you for your time, and the same to the audience. All the best.
Thank you, Susie.
Thank you.
Thanks.